Hello Internet, my name is Jay and this is the third episode of Hackmastering Roll20, where we look at the Roll20 virtual tabletop and how to use it specifically with Hackmaster, the greatest game ever made. Trademark. Okay, so today we're going to look at probably most DM's favorite thing, monsters, and how to populate your own Hacklopedia of beasts. Now, this might seem incredibly obvious to most people, but it took me a while to realize that the best thing to do is to, instead of creating a new monster sheet every single time, is to create a standardized generic monster template sheet, and then every time you want to create a new monster, you just duplicate that and fill in all the fields. It also took a little while to figure out what kind of statistics to bother adding in, what gets used by what macros and what API scripts. We'll get into those a bit later, but here's what I've come up with. So let's switch on over. Okay, so we see here the characters that were made last time, and creating a monster is pretty much the same as making a character. Let me just go on to it. I made one here. This is how I would usually like to start. I made one here called the Hacklopedia. Okay, so Hacklopedia, I'll click on it. It's got the big giant old Hacklopedia eye for the icon and a bunch of information already in there. But before we get into that, let's just go to edit. One thing, like I mentioned last time, is very important. Even though the GM can actually access and move around anything, you still need to put your name in the player journal and can be edited and controlled by add your name into there, even though you're the GM and have super access. This is important because of some of the API scripts, especially the initiative one, will tell you that it's not your action unless you do that. So make sure you do that. And the reason I use this Hacklopedia eye as the avatar here is for two simple reasons. One, it looks cool. Yeah, we all know it looks cool. If I was thinking further enough ahead, I would have worn the Hacklopedia t-shirt for this episode. Anyway, the other thing is that it's really obvious. So if I come out of here, I could see I've got my null that I've made previously, and the Hacklopedia. The eyeball is really obvious. It helps you identify monsters that you haven't finished setting up yet. I'd like to make changing the picture the last thing I do. That way I can also remember if I accidentally didn't save or something. You can see a visual indicator that it's not yet completed. Let's go into it. Okay, so don't need to worry about that. Character sheet, generally you don't want to add anything onto the character sheet for monsters. Everything on the monsters will be in the attributes and abilities section. The only thing that's different is I will put their observation and listening values in there and use these sometimes. You know, it depends. Alright, well let's look at the information we've got here. I've made fields for all of these, so we have initiative, speed, attack, damage, defense, DR, threshold of pain, rate of fire if they have a ranged weapon, ranged damage, jab speed, jab damage if they have those, physical, mental, dodge, saving throws, tenacity, and fatigue. And then over here, there's also just a ability that I made here called details. So if we look at this details thing, it's basically going to whisper the GM a bunch of details about the monster. Sometimes, you'll set a bunch of things up in an adventure ahead of time, and when you actually start playing, it's like, oh god, how fast do these things actually move? You can just press the button. Now, I've got this set up with much of it was just an X. When you actually make the correct monster, you would fill that in with all of the actual pertinent data. Technically speaking, you could also make each of those a field down here in the attribute section and have it go to those, but because these aren't going to be modified by anything or directly used, it takes pretty much the exact same amount of effort, and I just found this a bit easier. Okay, so let's give you an example then of a finished monster sheet. So here we have the Knoll. There's his avatar. In fact, where are we here? Hey, there's everything. Okay, so the Knoll. It's all been filled in. He's got initiative of 4. Note the initiative is just their plus or minus modifier. It does not affect their dice change. That kind of thing would be something you would put in the details section. Speed, attack, damage. I gave him a longsword, 2d8 exclamation point, P, +3, no ranged attack. There's all of the pertinent information that will be used by different macros during combat. That will be an entire episode all on its own because there's a fair amount of those. And then the details, as you can see, have been filled in with the correct values. And I have made this a token action. So what that means, there's two ways you can have macros. You can have them show in the macro bar. If something is in the macro bar, then it will be down here at the bottom. And I like to have a lot of my macros down there, to be honest. I usually prefer not to have them on the token, but I know a lot of people run them on the tokens. There is one a bit different that I'll show you later, but basically when you make it a token action, instead of it being constantly always down on the bottom all the time, it's only when that token is highlighted, and then you will see it comes up and says details there. So I can click on details, and now it will tell me, you can't see it of course because my face is in the way, so I'll just hit details again, I guess. In fact, I'm on the wrong monitor. Okay, details. Alright, here we go. Let's hit it one more time, just for kicks. Okay. So you can see null details, its size and weight, its tenacity, its intelligence, crawl, all its movement, vision types, awareness senses, all that kind of stuff. So basically that you can just press that details button to get a little bit of info to remind you. This gets whispered to you as the GM, the players don't see it. Alright, so let's just, as an example, create a new one and see how that works. So to create a new monster, we'll go on the Hacklopedia here, and you'll go to Edit and Duplicate. So that's made a new page, and they always give them some crazy name. What do we have here? Oh, no, not this one, because it's a duplicate. Never mind. Haha. Okay, so copy of Hacklopedia. I can edit it. Let's make this a goblin, not a golbin. A goblin. Good old goblin. And we'll fill in his attributes. So basically I'll get out the Hacklopedia, look it up. If I was really thinking ahead, I would have marked this page. Okay, so goblin, they've got an initiative of 3. Going by the old Jolly Blackburn combat rows here, I can find most of this information really quick. Speed 8. Attack 3. So one thing you'll notice, I'm only entering using a short sword, so 2d6. Alright, so you notice I'm only entering things on the left hand side because these are values, are absolute values. They're not part of a pool that changes like hit points or mana or something like that. Defense 2, DR2. Threshold of Pain, I should mention one thing that's important because they're going to be using macros for these is you always want to make sure you keep your terminology consistent. This is just what I use. You can use whatever you want. Like you could use SPD instead of spelling speed all the way, but you have to make sure it's always the same across the board. So threshold of pain is actually actually the value that you're saving on, not the threshold that you check on, right? Because that's going to be different for every individual goblin. Depending on their starting hit points. So this, I'm on the wrong thing again. Alright, so this is going to be 6. Oops. That's just their half constitution. Rate of fire, no. Jab, no. Okay, physical. 3, 2, 4. Tenacity is nervous, which I think is a -4, -2. I can't remember. That's one nice thing about Hacklopedia Beasts 2 that they're in the process of doing. They actually put the values there, not just what window it is. And I'm not going to bother filling in all of the ability stuff right now. You kind of get the idea. And then as the last thing that I would do is, of course, remove this. Let's make him a goblin. And there we go. We have a goblin. I could just pull that bad boy off here, and now I've got a goblin. One thing I like to do, as you can see with this previously existing one, is I like to change the size for any small creatures like goblins, kobolds, halflings to 50 by 50. I find it's a pretty good size. And then for like goblin leaders, I'll make them 55, you know, and For like goblin females, like 45. You know, it's subtle, but it's just noticeable enough. I could roll the hit points for him. Let's see. Alright, he's got 20 hit points. So I can just double click this, and he's a goblin. He represents goblin. I can call him Goblin A. You can name each individual token something different, even if they're coming off of different pictures. And he's got 20 hit points out of 20 hit points. Now, unlike characters, I do not recommend linking that to any actual attribute on the character sheet. That's because unless you only have that one monster, for like it's a boss monster for the entire adventure and you're never going to use it ever again, because basically that'll be linked to every goblin then. Like, because if I want more goblins, I would basically, whoops, copy, paste, and see, now I've got more than one goblin. If this guy takes damage, it does not affect that one. So the problem is, if you have them linked, it's kind of cool for a single character, like a player character. It automates the moving of hit points. But if you do that with multiple creatures sharing the same template, it would adjust all of them down 6. You know, if you heal one, it heals all of them. So you want to avoid that. Also, the final thing I would probably do is for this goblin is, now that I've got him, I would select his token and make that a selected token. Now, ordinarily, I probably wouldn't use something that had an A, B, or 1, 2, or whatever on it. That just happened to be with the first goblin I found. In some modules that come, especially that come with the virtual table pack, they're often labeled like this. In that case, there's an extra step where you're going to probably want to use a different actual token image for every single one of those. But that's relatively easy to do. You would basically instead go to your art, find a goblin. So let's just look up goblins in my library. Okay, so here we got Goblin 1. I'll bring him over. Oh, it took a while. Okay, let's make him 50 by 50 as well. Okay, woo! And we will name him Goblin 1, and he will represent a goblin. And let's give him 21 hit points, because he's more of a badass. So what that means is that this goblin and this goblin have the exact same statistics. If I use an attack macro on this one, it will look up the exact same data as this one, even though they have a different token. You'll use that. Players will obviously cheese around this, knowing which ones are which number or what, especially if they see it on the initiative tracker. But I find for the amount of headache it saves, it's totally worth doing that. All right, that's how basically you set up your monsters in preparation for using them with lots of cool and nifty macros. We're going to get into that later. I believe the next episode will be about the initiative count up tracker, which will begin our journey into the wonderful world of API scripts. All right, so I will see you guys next time on Hackmastering Roll20.